Jason had warned me his dad might swing by unannounced, but I didn't expect it to be while I was half-dressed, standing in the middle of our small shared bedroom with a towel around my waist and damp hair clinging to my forehead. The door creaked, open without a knock. I turned, startled, as a man in his mid-40s froze in the doorway. Tall, well-built, with salt and pepper stubble and eyes that revealed more emotion than he probably meant to show, he looked at me, then quickly away. Sorry, he muttered, stepping back. Didn't realize you were in here. I nodded, stiffly, tightening the towel. It's okay, just got out of the shower. He gave a short, awkward chuckle. Right, that's obvious. And just like that, the door closed, leaving behind an odd silence. I stood still, heartbeat uneven, trying to decide whether I should feel embarrassed, amused, or unsettled. Jason's dad, Eric, had shown up an hour ago, suitcase in hand, talking on his Bluetooth earpiece, barely glancing at me as he walked through the apartment. Jason had gone to grab something from the store, leaving us alone for a few minutes. Until now, I hadn't exchanged more than a few words with the man. He seemed like the type who wore tailored suits even at breakfast, and had a comment about everything but revealed nothing about himself. After I got dressed, I moved to the kitchen, still distracted. He was there, scrolling through his phone, a coffee already in hand. Sorry again, he said without looking up. No worries, I replied. Door locks, you know. They're tricky. He smirked, finally meeting my eyes. I'll be sure to knock next time. There was something about the way he looked at me. Calm, unreadable, but lingering a second longer than expected. I shrugged, it off, brushing past him to grab a glass of water. Jason came back not long after, unaware of the weird tension that had slipped into the air. He was cheerful, talking about dinner plans, completely at ease. Eric resumed his role as the charming, distant father, nodding along but barely present. I watched him from across the room, unsure what that moment in the bedroom had meant, if anything. Later that evening, I lay in bed, scrolling aimlessly on my phone. My mind kept drifting back to the look on Eric's face. Not surprised, not embarrassed, but searching. Like he had seen something he wasn't supposed to, and it had stirred something in him. The memory of it lodged in my thoughts, refusing to fade. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was nothing. But some part of me knew better. Something unspoken had entered the space between us. And deep down, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to ignore it, or see what happened if I didn't. Jason left that Friday afternoon for a weekend hiking trip with friends, tossing his backpack over one shoulder and calling out a casual goodbye as the door swung shut behind him. I hadn't expected Eric to stay behind, but apparently he had work meetings he couldn't skip. That left the two of us alone in the apartment, a detail that seemed benign until the silence between us started to stretch longer than it should have. I tried to keep busy. Cleaned the living room, reorganized a kitchen drawer I never used. But eventually I found myself in the kitchen again, where Eric stood slicing vegetables like he belonged there. You cook? I asked, genuinely surprised. He glanced over, his shoulder with a dry smile. I survive. Want some stir-fry? I nodded before I could think twice, and soon we were sitting at the tiny dining table, bowls in hand. The conversation was easy at first. Weather, news, the state of college, dorm food. But gradually, the walls began to shift. Eric leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed somewhere on the blank wall behind me. Marriage isn't what people think it is, he said suddenly. At least, not after 2 decades. I hesitated. You're not happy? He let out a breath, something between a sigh and a laugh. Let's just say we haven't shared a dinner table in months, and I don't know how to talk to Jason about it. I barely know how to talk to anyone about it. The vulnerability caught me off guard. This was a man who carried himself like a closed book, and now he was letting pages fall open. "You seem like you have everything together," I said quietly. He looked at me then, really looked. "That's the trick. Look like you do, and no one asks what's missing." A silence followed, but it wasn't awkward. It was charged, quiet, like something alive moving between us. His hand rested on the table near mine, close enough that the warmth of his skin radiated toward me. "College must feel like a different planet sometimes," he murmured. "Everything's new, emotional, raw." I nodded, unsure whether he was talking about me or himself. As I reached for my water glass, our hands brushed. A brief, accidental touch, but neither of us pulled away immediately. His fingers lingered against mine, just long enough to register. Then he stood abruptly, gathering dishes. "I'll clean up," he said, back to the clipped tone I'd first heard. I watched him at the sink, back turned, shoulders tense. That small touch had shaken something loose, and I didn't know whether I felt flattered, confused, or dangerously curious. Later, alone in my room, I couldn't stop thinking about the way his eyes softened when he spoke about loneliness, or how natural it had felt, sitting across from him like we were something more than strangers bound by my friendship with his son. And I knew deep down that something had begun, something I might not be able to stop. The rain came without warning, thick, heavy drops pelting the windows like the sky had suddenly decided to drown the city. The lights flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the apartment into a hushed darkness. I sat up in bed, my phone screen casting a faint glow as thunder rumbled in the distance. A soft knock at my door made me freeze. "It's me," Eric said quietly from the other side. "You okay?" I hesitated before replying. "Yeah, just startled." The doctor creaked open, and his silhouette appeared, backlit by the dim emergency lighting in the hallway. He stepped in slowly, cautious, as though he knew this was crossing a line but couldn't help himself. "I thought maybe you had candles or something," he said, though his hands were empty. His eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on me before shifting to the window. "I've got a flashlight somewhere," I said, rising from the bed, but neither of us moved. The room felt too quiet, too close. The air between us charged with unspoken thoughts and a tension that had been growing in the shadows all weekend. I couldn't remember when I started wanting him to come closer, only that now he had, and I didn't want him to leave. "You seem tense," he said, his voice lower than before. I looked at him, searching for something to anchor me. "It's been a weird couple of days." He nodded slowly. "For me too." A pause. Then he took a step forward. "We can pretend nothing happened," he said, voice trembling just enough to reveal the war inside him. "Or we can admit something's been happening all along." My breath caught. In that moment, there was no roommate, no friendship, no history, just the quiet storm of two people on the edge of something they shouldn't want, but couldn't resist. He reached out first. His hand touched my jaw, gentle, uncertain, then slid to the back of my neck. Our lips met like a question, soft, hesitant. But it deepened quickly, pulled by need neither of us could name out loud. The kiss turned into something more, something aching and honest, and when we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing heavily, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with meaning. He stepped back first, eyes wide, lips parted like he wanted to say something but couldn't. "I should go," he murmured. I nodded, though everything in me wanted him to stay. The door closed behind him. I stood, in the stillness, heart pounding, guilt already crawling up my spine. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and no matter how quiet the world was now, I knew a storm far greater than the one outside had just begun. And Jason, he would never forgive me if he found out. Jason returned on Sunday evening, drenched from the rain and glowing with stories. from his trip. He dropped his backpack on the couch and immediately started talking about mountain views and close calls with slippery trails. I forced a smile, nodding in the right places, but I couldn't meet his eyes for long. Not with the weight of what had happened still pressing against my chest like a secret trying to claw its way out. Eric barely said a word. He stayed in the kitchen, sipping coffee he didn't finish, eyes darting to me when Jason wasn't looking. I couldn't read him anymore. The softness from the night before had vanished, replaced with a cold, nervous distance. He looked like a man who wanted to erase a memory that refused to be forgotten. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay still, listening to the silence between the walls, waiting for something, anything to make the guilt go away. But it didn't. The next morning, it all came undone. Jason burst into my room without knocking, face pale and furious, phone clenched in his hand. "What the hell is this?" I sat up, heart racing. He threw the phone on the bed, an open message thread. My name. Eric's, a single damning sentence. Last night meant something to me too, but we can't do this. I froze. Jason didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just looked at me like I was someone he didn't recognize anymore. Was it a joke? Some sick curiosity? I stood, desperate to explain, but there was no explanation that wouldn't destroy him further. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said, voice breaking. "But it did," he replied flatly. "With my dad." He left that afternoon, packed his things in silence, no yelling. Just quiet devastation that somehow hurt worse than rage. Eric tried to speak to him, tried to explain, but Jason wouldn't even look at him. After he left, Eric stood in the hallway, shoulders slumped. "I never wanted to hurt him," he said, almost to himself. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. In the days that followed, the apartment felt hollow. Eric left 2 days later. Without a goodbye, I stayed behind, trying to pretend life could continue like before, but every room echoed with what had been lost. Weeks passed. Then one day, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. It was from Eric. A page-long apology, confessing regret, explaining he was in therapy, that the marriage had officially ended, that he hoped I'd find peace. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He only hoped I could move on. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I never opened again. Some betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from people who, for a moment, made you feel seen, and then left you to deal with the wreckage alone.